I'm going to be presenting on accessibility in video games. In case this is some of your first foray into accessibility, we're kind of actually going to gloss over a lot of the basics, and we're going to be focusing on video games. But if this gets you interested, be sure to join the channel, and we'll be able to share some links and stories, articles, everything to get you started. But yeah, so this is me. I'm not sure if many of you know, but my education is actually in game programming. And back when I went to college like 10 years ago, we covered graphics, physics, AI, networking, all for interactive media. But what was not covered was accessible game design. So that wasn't even talked about, not part of the education at all. The medium has grown a lot over the last decade. We're actually starting to talk about things like accessible game design, ethics. A lot of this has changed as a lot of people are, asking more questions as the media expands. And yeah, we're definitely getting into some interesting topics now. So yeah, as I said, we're gonna gloss over a lot of the basics, but just in case you want a high level intro to accessibility, there are many different kinds of abilities and differing levels, and different people are going to have different accessibility needs. So some may need sensory assistance, physical or cognitive. Accessible products actually benefit everyone, usually in unexpected ways. So when you design your products and services to be accessible, you actually benefit, a wide range of people who didn't know they need these things, people who are using these, features as kind of a power user. It actually improves your design across the product, and really lets you think and test from different angles. And yeah, the main point is accessibility matters, full stop. Everyone deserves to, experience media and be part of our culture. And video games is an increasingly large part of that. So I guess let's start with what's the current situation. It's pretty much just the Wild West. Compared to any other form of media, like movies, books, websites, programs that we work on, video games are just so far behind. There's really a complete lack of accessibility design in many games. And it really feels like a lot of games are designed for, the perfect person who has, perfect abilities and has no, disorders or sensory issues. And yeah, it really feels like there's a lack of care or a lack of, awareness of what could make these products better for people. And really, there's no standards, there's no laws, there's no clearance that games have to go through. It's really just up to the consumer to find what products work for them and to what degree. So yeah, some games are going to do better than others. Some do a great job, some do a pretty terrible job. And yeah, we'll get into some examples. Before we get into, some solutions, let's go over some of these basic examples that are really going to show that some projects just don't have any care or awareness. So a big thing in a lot of video games is font size. The text can be completely legible in some games. Up here, I've put a screenshot, one of Fire Emblem Three Houses and one of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Both games are on the Switch, portable, handheld. You can also play on the TV. But when you're using the portable device, you've got, a 5.5-inch screen. The Nintendo Switch Lite is really small, and some games really aren't designed to be played on such a small screen. And hopefully you can see that Fire Emblem here has such minor text, such tiny text size that almost no one's actually able to read it. Animal Crossing does a much better job here. But again, speaking of the Nintendo Switch, it's really a platform that's filled with a lot of games that are kind of an accessibility nightmare. Here's one thing that's pretty common that Nintendo first-party games do. They restrict controls in really strange ways. So, very popular game, Pokemon Let's Go. It lets you use the motion controls if you want to like swing the controller, and it lets you throw the Pokeball at the Pokemon. You have a great experience that way. But if you are using the game in the portable mode, you can't use the motion controls. And if you're using it on the TV, you have to use the motion controls. Strangely, even though that both input methods are programmed in, they restrict the user to play exactly how the designers have intended it in that situation. And when asked, like, what about the players who can't use the motion controls but need access, like need to play it on the larger screen, for vision issues, they have some motor issues. The developers just basically said, it would have been great if we considered them. And that paints a pretty clear picture. There's been no update to, open up the controls or add options that way. It's pretty unfortunate. Then, of course, you get into, some accessibility issues where games can actually cause harm sometimes. So a common thing for video games is that it is potentially dangerous for people with photosensitivity. And certain games can take that a bit far. And, there was a story last year about Cyberpunk 2077 came out, and it has scenes that are very fast, strobing bright lights, and there wasn't really an adequate warning, and resulted in at least one person getting a seizure, and they were able to put out like a PSA, and the developers were able to correct the issue. But it really shows that there's some things that maybe developers just weren't aware about. These things are easy fixes, each of these. It just, you have to have the attention to the issue. So why are games so difficult to build? I mean, accessible games. So when you look at movies, books, like other media like that, they have, some of the problems are solved for. But when it comes to games, it seems like it's a really difficult problem. So I listed before some of those like really basic things, but there's a lot of complex, hard, really tough stuff that you have to solve when you're like working with a 3D world that has moving cameras, crazy inputs with like controllers with 20 buttons on them, physics, artificial intelligence, networking. All of these things are making new situations that really you couldn't have predicted for, right? On top of that, each project basically is built from the ground up in a lot of cases and is completely unique. And maybe you solved one problem last project, but when you're working with like a new team in a new world with new input controls and everything, some of those solutions just aren't going to apply at all. So you have to reinvent the wheel each time. On top of that, video games, unlike a lot of like really high-end software, video games tend to be developed, sold, and then just abandoned, and aren't supported down the line unless it's like a live service game. Really, it comes down to money for a lot of companies. So they'd see maybe a poor return on investment. They might think that, the players who can have these needs aren't going to be buying the games, so they just don't cater to them. And it's pretty unfortunate. So when you're designing your game or building a level or, working on the UI, you have to consider like what is actually your intent. So there's lots of examples of, puzzles that are thrown into games that specifically require you to be able to tell the difference between red and green, or, something that you have to read, except the text is so small that you can't actually solve that puzzle. And that's completely separate from like the main purpose of the game. Here I've put on the screen a screenshot of Ocarina of Time, Legend of Zelda. So we've got the Lost Woods here. You might be 10, 20 hours into the game before you really explore the Lost Woods. And up until this point in the game, you've had a whole bunch of puzzles. Obviously, it's a puzzle-solving game. But all of a sudden, at this point, you are in an area that takes away your map, and you have to navigate your way through the forest by listening to the sounds of the music. And you approach the louder music, and you can actually make your way through the forest. Now, this is great. It gives you like a sense of being lost. It definitely conveys that feeling. But all of a sudden, you get to this place, and say you have your hard of hearing, or you're like playing on mute even. You have no idea that you're in this situation, and you can't solve this without, being able to hear properly. So you really need to think about the intent. They wanted to convey the feeling of being lost, yeah, but did they really want to lead the player into this like frustrating, opportunity? Yeah, so I'm not saying that, games have to strip back all of these unique experiences like this, but really it's worth thinking about. So below the Ocarina of Time screenshot, I have one of Papers, Please. This is a game where you're basically a border crossing guard. You inspect people's passports, their photos, documents, and keep all of the laws and changing regulations in your mind as you make sure everything is like above board. This game is about visually inspecting documents. So anyone coming into this game, they know what they're getting into. This is the challenge, and it's the challenge through the whole game. So it totally makes sense that somebody would need to be able to, be able to see these documents and inspect them and compare them in order to really experience what the game's laying at. And that's totally fine. That's like what the game is, and nobody's going to get caught off guard by that. Now, a big talk about accessibility in games leads to cheats and easy mode. So, back in the day, video games used to have all sorts of commands. You put them in, you become invincible. Or you can get it in easier mode, or have unlimited ammo, that sort of thing. It's interesting to see the change in framing over how like the easier or assisted modes are presented. So you can see a lot of games are now calling like the easier mode story mode, and they find that players actually pick the story mode more often when it's called story mode versus easy mode, because they don't feel, like they're cheaping themselves out of a better experience or a challenge. You can see that in Celeste, this is a game about actually overcoming a challenge, and it has a really good conversation around it. This game, you climb a mountain. It's very difficult, but it actually did ship with an assist mode. In this mode, it presents this message to you that says this game is about a challenge, but different things are challenging to different people. You can turn on various kinds of assistance that will make it easier for you, but they let you know that the intent of the game is to have a hard time with it. So they ask you to please like set the settings how you're going to have a hard time, but not so hard that you're going to get frustrated and quit. They want you to experience the story in the game. They want you to feel accomplished when you're done. But what that means for you is different for each person. And yeah, there's a screenshot of Wolfenstein 3D, game back in the day where, you chose the easiest setting. It puts a baby bonnet and soother in your mouth. So I'm not saying it's bad to, present it this way, but just know that how you're framing this is gonna like have a lasting impact on how the player feels about themselves when they're playing your game. Now, when it comes to difficulty, some games are getting really interesting with how they handle it. This was one of my favorites here, Green Hell. It's a survival game where you're lost in the jungle. Now, this one breaks down its difficulty settings into 10 or 12 different settings. So you can change like how much you need to worry about your character's nutrition versus their sanity. You can, balance what kind of creatures and enemies will spawn and how often. Some games you can like change the length or coldness of the night. That's a big thing in survival games. What's really good about being able to turn on or tune these different difficulty levels for the player is they can set whatever challenge they're ready for that day. They can tune it to their liking. They can tune it to like their liking of their friends that they're playing with. But then it gives actually a lot of extra bonuses. So when you're a player, you can set these things and it's really engaging because you can get rid of all the spiders if you don't want them, or if you have trouble seeing them because they're in the underbrush. But when you're a designer, you can actually program now changing levels of difficulty based on all of these variables that you've set. So you can actually make a harder mode or an easier mode once you've designed your game so that you have all of these, on sliders instead of just hard coding every experience that's in the game. It makes it much more flexible to tune it to, the will of the players. And speaking of changing difficulty, there's actually some games like Resident Evil 4, they'll use adaptive difficulty. So based on the user's experience, if they're having a hard time, you can secretly, increase the amount of ammo and health items that are dropped. And if they're having a really easy time with it, you can spawn a lot more enemies and make them struggle a bit more. And this makes it so that every player has their own experience and it's, they get to experience the right balance of difficulty. Now, I'll have to gloss over this next game a bit, but I really like what The Last of Us Part 2 has done. That's just like a huge thing. You'd have to, I'm going to share this article and you can read all about the accessibility options in The Last of Us Part 2. But they have accomplished something incredible. They've taken a 3D, like hard survival horror type game. It's very action oriented, but they've built in so many video, audio, and motor accessibility options that it really, it makes it playable by almost anyone. So for some examples, for audio accessibility, there will be like awareness indicators, pickup notifications. The subtitles will have names, colors, and point to the words, the direction that the voice is coming from. There'll be vibration cues in the controller for when you're fighting or when you're playing the guitar. And the characters will prompt you to dodge in certain directions. For motor controls, there's presets where you can actually have the controls designed so that you have to hold your controller upside down because some people need that. But there's some other options like infinite breath when you're swimming, turning off the weapon sway so that you're always locked on, auto-targeting enemies, or making it so you don't fall off the edges as easily. And then for vision accessibility, there's a lot of text on a poster or whatever. It can read that out to you. You can turn on high contrast display. So if you have, poor vision but not none, you can see here on the left, there's actually a mode to highlight enemies, items, yourself, so that you can tell what things are and you can easily avoid them without having to tell all this fine detail. But you can just skip certain puzzles if they're based on, vision. You can make it so that you're hiding. When you're hiding, you're completely invisible to any enemies. It makes it a lot more of a playable experience to people who need that. Now, the studio behind The Last of Us Part 2 is huge. They've been working on games for a long time. So it's kind of easy to look at such a big project and see its great accessibility achievements and just say like, they have infinite money, they have infinite time, they can do whatever they want. But the truth is like, they've put all of this work in. They've been building these tools for a long time for this reason, and it's paying off in a big way. They're really investing time and money into building these tools and setting a standard for the entire industry, and it's really amazing. If you go and you read the article and see some of the examples of the accessibility options in motion, it'll kind of just blow you away. It'll probably take like 2 hours to read through all of the settings that they've given. It's really awesome. So yeah, please check that out after. Another thing worth talking about when it comes to accessibility in games is representation. So in a lot of ways, representation in games, so game character diversity has always been a really, really low point compared to books, movies, songs even. Characters in games are pretty much relatively standard. There's very little variance, but we're seeing that increase over time. Diversity is gradually, getting there. When it comes to, sensory or motor, the characters tend to have perfect or even, well beyond perfect abilities, like superhuman abilities, obviously. But when it comes to neurodiverse characters, there's actually quite a lot there. So if you look into horror genre, they really play with a lot of the ideas of, different cognitive effects for your characters. And one of them that's really interesting is Hellblade. So Hellblade was designed both as, an action horror game, puzzle game, but also kind of a showcase of how it feels to have psychosis and experience the effects of that. And I'll share a link to the making of documentary for Hellblade, and they show like the links that they go to convey the experience of having psychosis very, very accurately, and still being able to, have a fully playable game in that and really let it play into it. We should talk about testing for accessibility. So there's a lot that can be done for testing for accessibility in games. There's obviously some low bar, like having automated font size checks or colorblind mode so that your developers and testers can simulate these experiences and make sure that stuff passes a decent level. But what really is important is actually bringing in players from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of abilities, all kinds of mindsets, and letting them actually play and test your games. So nothing can, surpass that. You need to bring in people to test. You need to watch them and listen to them play, take that feedback, and really, really listen to it, and make changes if you need to. Now, striving for a diverse staff is going to have, a big effect on that. If you have a diverse team, you're going to have, you're going to skip all of those situations where you get 90% of the way through a project and you say, oh, we haven't even considered this. But of course, you can pay for accessibility audits. You can bring in people temporarily to just do a prescriptive look at your game and just say, these are the very obvious areas that you're lacking. But yeah, nothing will compare to actually getting people to bring in people to come and test your game. And now on to accessibility mods. So the great thing about PC gaming versus console gaming is that PC games, you can mod them. And there do exist accessibility mods for many games. So, Skyrim, Sekiro, these games, they're pretty popular, but there are mods for them to make text easier to read, changing the colors of items so that you can see them if you have colorblind issues, or actually just adding a whole bunch of accessibility options in the case of Sekiro. So if you were a player, look into these mods. There are things that other players have granted you. And if you're a developer, maybe pay attention to the kinds of accessibility mods that people are making for your game. That's probably the biggest hint I've ever seen on that you need to add some features into your game. If people are actually willing to develop to make your game better for them, you might as well bring them on, bring this feature into the game, make it official. And speaking of accessibility, mods for games, you can actually build some yourself. So this is kind of a tangent here, but my girlfriend has misophonia, and that's described as a disorder where hearing certain sounds can cause discomfort, uneasiness, sensation of physical pain. So certain sounds like teeth grinding or, ear ringing. There are certain sounds that just set some people off. And my girlfriend and I, we both really love playing survival games. But unfortunately, a big part of survival games is eating, drinking, throwing up when your character's sick. And these are all the kinds of sounds that really set her off. She really enjoys the games, but can't get past a lot of these things and just has to stop for a moment. And what's interesting about survival games is they tend to be 3D and they tend to have dynamic audio, which is fantastic from a media sense. Like you've got your audio sources, say you hear a tree falling down in the forest, you can hear it really far. Say you're fighting some guy up close, you can hear them grunting in front of you or whatever. But when you're eating, the developers tend to put the sound source directly in your ears. So you can hear all of this eating, drinking, throwing up, all of this sounds directly in your ears because the source is so close, and it's probably the loudest sound in in any survival game. So what I did is I learned how to mod Green Hell, Forest, Minecraft, and just get rid of these sounds. And I was able to center the mod. She was able to play the game and enjoy a much better experience. And now we can just relax and play the games we want. So if the mods don't exist for the games that you're playing, a lot of us are programmers. You can actually build them. There are existing modding tools in the community that are willing to help you. And you join Discord or you go on Nexus Mods, there's actually really passionate people that are willing to help. And it's really interesting to learn how a game is built, make some mods for them, ship them, and help some other people. Now, we should talk about the physical aspects of accessibility for games. A big part of this is being able to control the games, obviously. I'm going to kind of gloss over this, but Xbox and Microsoft, they've created the adaptive controller, which is this big controller where you can easily control the, instead of having sticks, you have these touch sensitive pads along the back of the controller. There's, I think, maybe 20 different headphone jacks where you can plug in any sort of accessories. So foot pedals, these little controllers that you'll put in your mouth and control with your cheek or your tongue, and various other kinds. Microsoft has given a whole bunch of abilities and settings on the Xbox so that you can use two controllers to play the same game as the same player. That sort of thing lets you control things with your two hands if you can't move them together. And there's a lot more to be said about this. So we'll link to the accessible controllers after the presentation. And Speaking of like controller accessibility, a bunch of controllers now, especially the ones on Nintendo Switch, tend to have faults. And some people just don't find it possible to, buy a new controller every time something breaks or is faulty. It's interesting to bring up some games actually are incorporating settings that allow you to disable like certain buttons or certain sticks. And these two here, Iconfell and Axiom Verge, I play them on Switch and my controller is, drifting. So I can actually turn off the analog sticks and play these games just fine. This was meant as an accessibility option so that it, can disable the controller inputs that would mess with you if you happen to like not be able to control your hand properly. But this, has a bonus effect of enabling people with faulty controllers to be able to control the game. So when we talk about selling games, you want to make sure the whole selling experience is actually accessible. So when it comes to building an accessible storefront, I think a big thing of that is demos. So let the players demo the games before they buy them. So let them get them on their system, see if they can run it, see if they have the settings that they need to be able to play it before you charge them for it. It seems like a lot of stores are running like a no-touchy kind of rule where most games, you don't get to play it at all. You get to look at it, you get to see, ooh, that looks like a fun experience. You pay the $80 or $100 for these games, full price, and then you get it and you find out that it doesn't even work for you for one reason or another. So yeah, letting the user play the game before, try it out like any other store, that would definitely come a big way. But yeah, having a clear and honest store listing or even publishing accessibility guides before the game is released so that people know what they're getting into, that would be really helpful. And then when it comes to the owners of the storefront, I think it would be important to actually honor refunds for usability reasons. So there are a lot of games, say Slime Rancher on the PlayStation, where a lot of players, have motion sickness when playing this game. And then when they reached out to Sony for refunds, because the game makes them sick and gives them pain, nausea, they're told, too bad. You bought this, you downloaded this file, the money's ours. Enjoy. Now, outside of the world of video games, has anything that we've talked about, have you learned anything from this? I think the key here is that video games with its hugely in-depth number of interconnected systems, it's complicated issues when it comes to accessibility. If it can be solved in games, it can be solved in other places. So when a lot of us are working on products that aren't related to games, you should be inspired by this. You should look into this and say, if someone can make something like a first-person shooter accessible to the blind, we should be able to make our products accessible. You can take it one step at a time, you can improve it, but bring in people, get them to test it, see what improvements you can make. You can make a better experience for everyone. Obviously, listen to your modding community. I brought that up before. This applies to more than just games. People are hacking solutions to all sorts of products. Keep your eye on Twitter, Facebook. There are some stories that people are posting about how they have to get around certain things, and really highlight those experiences and try to incorporate them into your core product if you can. Increase your transparency within the company and what you're intending to do and who you're intending your things for. And yeah, open up your APIs. I know we do a good job at ecobee by letting the user not only control their thermostat through the cloud, but actually program their own applications to enable other people to control devices. And I think that's really great. a good thing to do is to also pay attention to what shortcuts and testing features your team is working on. So when they use like some shortcuts in like the development and testing of your product, you can actually pay attention to that and keep an eye on it and actually expose some of these like settings to the customer. Because if your people working on these products every day are taking these shortcuts, there's probably a reason. And it could actually help people in a lot of ways. And last, as a consumer, what can you do? So the biggest thing, obviously, is to vote with your wallet. A lot of this comes down to money, unfortunately. But if you buy games and products that consider accessibility, it's going to inspire companies to actually care about that and, take that forward. When like you have the option to researching before you buy, so don't just buy something, pre-order it before it exists. Actually look into it, see what mods, see what settings are available, see if there's demos, and actually try it as much as you can. Get a feel for what they've done to make this product usable to you before you actually buy it. And if you played a game or used a product that you find is accessible or has certain features or is lacking in certain ways, write a review, reach out to the developers. In the case of smaller or indie projects, a lot of these developers are just open to you having a conversation with them. A lot of these games have their own Discord channels. You can go in there and you can talk to every single member of the team. You can actually just have a conversation with them, and they're usually very happy to hear from a fan. And yeah, I'd recommend messing around and trying out various accessibility features, even if you don't feel you need them. So get a feel for what developers are implementing features that you can use, and keep your family and friends in mind. So there might be some settings that you might not use, but they'd be great for, your partner, your child, your parent. If you find a way that will make it easier for you to play with a family member or a friend, that's going to be a great way for you to build a connection with them. And the last thing I'd say is try to refund projects and products that don't meet your needs. If it very clearly is unusable or you feel misled, fight for a refund to get your money back. There are things that you can spend your money on that are better. So I've shared a bunch of links here. This presentation is in the channel, so please feel free to open it up and grab everything you need. You can ask us questions now, I guess, if we have time.
Yeah. We have about 5 minutes, so opening it up for questions. But that was super awesome. I learned a lot. I have questions as well, but I'm going to let other folks ask their questions first. I can ask mine in Slack.
Yeah, thank you. And while we're waiting for some questions, shout out to Guild Ally, the Slack channel. There's also Guild Gamers and Guild Game Dev. So you're welcome to post these questions here, or talk in this meeting, or share any links that you find interesting, because I love reading about this. It really was tough for me to shorten down this presentation from like a few hours to just what it is. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Meryl?
Hey John, such a great talk, and makes me want to become more of a gamer too. It's I feel like you should work with a gaming company. I'm just wondering what you think. I just sort of would love your honest opinion on how important you think accessibility will become. All the points you made are so clear that it should become accessible, and it doesn't seem like it's so from someone who can't code. It doesn't seem like it's so difficult to make these things accessible. What do you think the actual outcome is? Are companies going to take this more seriously and implement it, or is it more like a philosophy that we hope people will adopt?
So it's kind of both. one, it's just better to have this philosophy from the outset. So like when you're designing your products and your services from the beginning, it's great to think like, hey, is everyone going to actually be able to use this? How many people are going to be able to use this? Who's going to have trouble with these things? But then down the line, in the end, you can see it really pays off from a monetary like perspective. So you'll end up seeing that like there's like accessible products will have, you know, a bigger community. They'll have more people who are passionately like going to stay with your brand. There's going to be more people who are going to fight for you, like when, you know, a competitor comes along. And yeah, it's going to end up benefiting you in the long run.
Yeah,
as a seller of products, I mean.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to vote with my wallet too. Like, I won't buy games that aren't accessible because I do think like the money talks. You know, it's what they'll see. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Cool. I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
Someone must have a question.
All right, well, I'll take this moment to just say, kind of out there, but there's a really funny accessibility setting in this game called Grounded. So in this game, it's basically Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. You're a tiny little kid like in a garden, but you have to fight like the bugs. So there's ladybugs, there's ants, but there's spiders as well. And this game has, you know, a spider sensitive meter. And you can actually dial down how spidery the spiders look from very realistic to just amorphous blobs, so they don't look like spiders anymore. But you still get to experience the whole game.
That's awesome. We have two questions. I think it's Miguel and then Kate.
So it's not a question. I'm just jumping on the hype train here. There's a surprising number of games with like arachnophobia filters. Like there's a game called Satisfactory where it basically turns all the spiders into like cats, which is awesome. Yeah. So great presentation, John. Just yeah, adding hype. Yeah.
Thanks, Miguel. Kate?
This is a totally personal question. Two of my 4 kids are teenagers who want to be game developers. Are there any resources that are sort of aimed at the younger audience for thinking about this so that I can plant the seeds with them now?
You know, I'm not sure like specifically about accessible game design. I'll have to like do some looking and I'll get back to you. But
Awesome.
I definitely want to find something to help them because it's really exciting. I know there are a lot of tools and ways to get started in game design and game programming that are like better suited for, you know, a younger audience who maybe you've not programmed yet. And yeah, it's a great way to get started. But on actual accessible design, I don't know, it seems like not so many people are talking about it just yet.
Yeah, they've got access to all sorts of things, and I would just like them to be thinking about this early.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'll look around and I'll reach out.
Thanks.
Okay, I think that's about time for us. Thank you so much, John. That was an awesome talk. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.